אוקיי, ערב טוב, good evening. לעונג הוא לי לארח איתנו היום בשיחת וובינר את הבמאי אנדרי A. טרקובסקי, בנו של הבמאי הגדול אנדרי טרקובסקי. לפני שנתחיל בשיחה, אני רק רוצה לציין שהיום, מוקדם יותר היום, הלכה לעולמה אילנה צור, המייסדת והמנהלת הראשונה של דוק אביב, בעצם זו שדוק אביב הוא החזון שלה, ועל כך כמובן אנחנו כואבים. אז אני אעבור עכשיו לאנגלית, אני רק אציין שאם יש שאלות, אנא תכתבו אותם ב-Q&A ולא בצ'אט, ואנחנו נתייחס לשאלות במידת הזמן שיתאפשר לנו. Okay, so good evening and welcome to our webinar meeting with Andrey A. Tarkovsky, the son of the acclaimed filmmaker Andrey Tarkovsky, one of the geniuses of cinema in all times, I think. Not think, I'm sure. And first of all, I just say that we have some sad news today. Ilana Tsur, the founder and the director for many years of Dok Aviv, has passed away earlier today. And of course, we are heartbroken for the news. But Dok Aviv is her vision and will stay her vision. So welcome to the 22nd edition of Dok Aviv and to our discussion with Andrey A. Tarkovsky, who is also the head of the International Institute, the Andrey Tarkovsky International Institute. We'll talk about the film Andrey Tarkovsky, A Cinema Prayer, and if you have any questions, please write them down on the Q&A section, and we will refer to these questions as time will allow us. And of course, this screening of Andrey Tarkovsky, A Cinema Prayer, is a part of the collaboration with the Russian Cultural Center in Tel Aviv, and we thank them very much. So maybe Mr. Tarkovsky, I'll ask first few questions. This that it is made only from film clips and in the voice of your late father, as if he is making his own autobiographical film. Plus the fact that your name is Andrey Tarkovsky. So in a way, it's a film on Andrey Tarkovsky, an autobiography, a posthumous autobiography of Andrey Tarkovsky made by you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the way that you started to work on.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part because there was some connection.
Yes, so maybe you could tell us about the way that you imagined the film, perceived the film. How did you decide to make this kind of film? Because I know you've already made a documentary on your father.
Yes.
So.
Well, actually, this film is not an attempt to create a complete autobiography of Tarkovsky or any kind of biography, you know. My intent was quite personal. It was my own memories of my father after so many years of since he departed. So I was trying to recollect it, put together, and create somehow to meet him again in a way. So, and there were so many films, so many materials, books and everything written on Tarkovsky. And it was useless maybe to make another documentary with the interviews and about Tarkovsky because it wasn't my intent. You know, I felt somehow that with all this materials and studies made about him, his own ideas, his own thoughts were a little bit put aside because some studies are very interesting. Some of them have some maybe errors, and so I was thinking that it was a good idea to make him speak after all these years, you know, to put him in front of the audience directly without any filters of any kind, of any sort. Of course, as a director, I edited the audio records, you know, in our case, that 900 hours of the material. So I had to create a story, but actually that was only, and as for the video as well, but it was only editing part. The rest is my father. And then this film was also intended to create a connection, very important connection between my father and my grandfather, Arseny Tarkovsky, great Russian poet. And because without Arseny Tarkovsky, maybe there won't be Andrei Tarkovsky. He inherited this poetical language, and they're both poets. So this dialogue, and very important dialogue between father and son and poets, and also quite painful because of the separation of the family. And all this whole time my father tried to search father. He was actually always an opinion about his film. Was the first person he was asking was his father, what he think about the film. So this is, and the poems which we hear in the film were recorded for the mirror, but they didn't make it into the film. So, but the recording was made, and it's actually the first time they appear on, we can hear them because we had it in our archives. When I found them, they were beautiful, and I think they illustrate very well, you know, the certain periods of life of my father. Of course, the film is divided in chapters, and each chapter may be dedicated to film, but also because his films are where you cannot actually separate Tarkovsky from his film and his life from his films. Actually, this is like milestones of his own existence, of his own way of going through life, you know, knowing and searching for the answers. So each film is a period, very distinct period in his life. So that's why, of course, films making part of this biographical film.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you actually was trying, you were trying to rediscover or to get in touch again with your father through his filmic materials, through the interviews and the recordings of his voice. And maybe I'll try to ask, through this film, were you trying maybe not only to communicate, but tell him something now that you are a grown man, that you are a filmmaker of your own? Were you trying to tell him something that maybe you didn't get a chance to tell?
Well, maybe it's just to thank him, because, you know, sometimes by working, actually it was very nice experience working on this film. It was actually difficult because with all the artistic team, me, I mean, Michael Islovsky, who was editor of Sacrifice as well, and DOP, who is my cousin, Alexei Nelyonov, who was make his first practice on the mirror. So everybody knew my father, and for us it was just kind of a amarcord of his of life, of my father, of his figure. And although, however, yes, I was trying to, you know, you grow, because when he left, when he died, I was 16, you know, I was a kid. So many things, many questions you expect to get from your parent, from your father, which is a very important figure. For me, it was quite difficult. So I had to find them through in his films and his works. And so actually, this is also a recollection for me of thoughts. And I have to say that, of course, his vision greatly influenced mine. And if sometimes son is against, or somehow there is a kind of, you know, thought between generations. In my case, it is not. Actually, I received with this, working through this material, listening to his voice, his ideas, his visions, especially his idea about art, about spiritual part of human life, about faith. Somehow they recall they find a resonance in me. So it was very nice. It was kind of meeting, but also, putting some pieces together, and also to find some interior peace for me, of course, by reconnecting on a distance with him.
And of course, you know, I'm sure you know his films by heart, and I'm sure you know most of the materials that you use. But once you use the recordings vis-a-vis the visuals from the films, was there a minute or something, or a point of discovery, something that you did not know, something that you thought you knew, but suddenly it became like a revelation?
Well, actually, there was more not in the images, but in his words, which I find quite strong. Because the name of the film, A Cinema Prayer, it comes from his own words when he says that for me, art and my cinema is my prayer. So if someone correspond and my prayer could be useful for them, so my art is useful for that person. So this is very important. Actually, cinema said that. And with this film, his profound religious ideas came out. He wasn't talking about much then. Of course, it's all in his films, and we all know, but this profound faith that he had, and very, very strict and very precise since the beginning of his artistic careers in his life, was quite surprising for me. So actually, he repeats only twice in his life in 2 interviews when he said, for me, my cinema is my prayer. And that was quite revealing for me as well. Because sometimes people who studied him, film critics, said Tarkovsky wasn't a believer. He was kind of maybe agnostic. He was someone borderline. But here we see his really profound Christianity, and it's really Christian roots. And since the Andrei Rublev, which the film, he was 32 when he was shooting it. It's incredible how mature spiritually he was already when he was talking about the icon and the image and the idea of the image. So this actually was quite surprising. When putting together 1 hour and a half of filmic time, his words, it comes out very strongly. So, and of course, as the images from the films which I choose, I was trying to find the more autobiographical parts, because in every film there's a big autobiographical part from his life, his dreams. He never filmed a dream which he wasn't dreaming. That's why he was talking about it. I'm dreaming every night. I dream every day. I don't have to even write them down and it was incredible. There's this incredible capacity of dreaming, and also, of course, the family reference in the films, which are very important, which, of course, general public doesn't know. And so that's why I tried to create his very personal, intimate portrait out of his film.
And I'll just remind the audience that if you have any questions, please write them on the chat section if you want to ask. I think it was 20 years ago, something like that, Chris Marker made a film, documentary following the shoot, I think it was 30 years ago, sorry, following the shooting of The Sacrifice, called The Day in the Life of Andrei Tarkovsky. And there is a scene there where he tells us the story that as a young man, your father actually had a seance, and the spirit of Boris Pasternak, the noted writer, was there and telling him that he will direct 7 films. Only 7, your father asked, and the spirit of Boris Pasternak answered, yes, but good ones. Can you tell us a little bit about this story? Is it true? Is it?
Well, actually, it's in the 70s in Russia, it was very popular. This kind of spiritual research. So there were spiritual sittings and evocation and whatever. Sometimes my father participated, of course, that. He was always curious about spiritual part of life, any kind, you know, from yoga, Buddhism, Zen. And so this also was kind of his curiosity. And apparently, actually, he wrote this story in his diaries, in Martyrologue. And yeah, and it was, I think, 73 or 74 when that happened. And he said, yes, that's true. He wrote it down. And actually, when he got ill after during the shooting of Sacrifice in December of 1985, he wrote down, and actually it was a note for my mother, because Larissa, do you remember? Actually, Boris Leonidovich was right, because he knew that Sacrifice was his last film. He was dying. And yeah, that's actually one of the many mystical things, actually, what happened with him. And but it was always something strange happening. And like, for example, on Stalker, on the long shot of the water with all the pieces of human creations, painting, you remember the Stalker's dream. And at a certain point, there is a calendar leaf, and it's 28th of December, the day of his death. And it was shot in 1970. It is also, you know, one of the things which you never know, you know. But of course, artist has a great intuition. Each genius artist has that. So how it happened, we don't know, but there are some kind of coincidences, stories like that around my father's life and his films.
And I think your film shows a lot about your father's view of his film, the clashes that he had, of course, with the Soviet authorities ever since Andrei Rublev. But there was one thing that maybe you are the only one who can actually answer. What kind of father was he? Did you talk a lot? Did you watch films a lot together? Did you watch his own films together? What kind of father was he?
Well, he was very, very nice and warm person. He was kind of ascetic, very hard man. Actually, he liked family. He liked good table, a lot of friends, almost every night around. And well, actually, he never separates cinema from life. You know, from set, he was coming home and he was keep on working, talking, and very trying to convince and the people also in the house to put them to tell them what he was doing. So it was very interesting. It was very, you know, stimulating atmosphere, very artistic atmosphere. So it was always very interesting being next to him. And he was very loving person. He was very nice, loving man. So it was also, as a father, it was incredible. You know, it was, for me, it was great to be near him. And so it's in everybody who was his friends or worked with him remember him like this, you know. And I remember when we were editing, we were talking with Michael Leshilovsky, the editor, and he said when my father passed away, actually in Sweden they organized a little meeting between friends who worked on the film just to commemorate his memory. And they met, and Sven Nykvist said, because actually almost all the team worked with Bergman, who worked on Sacrifice, Sven Nykvist and other set designer. So they met, and Sven said very nice things. He said, well, we were giving us totally for Bergman because we were afraid of him. And we gave everything to Tarkovsky because we loved him. So actually, he was a person who created. He liked to be, first of all, have a human connection with the people. So when he was choosing the DOP for Nostalgia, actually they met with Giuseppe Lanci, who is a great man and great DOP. And he was saying that they never talked about the script or the film. He never gave him the script. They were just going around, wandering, going eating, going to cinema, just trying to create a friendship. And only after, when my father felt that this man couldn't divide his ideas, his visions, he gave him a script and they start working on the film.
So we have a question from Gregory. I just write it. I'll just read it. I noticed something in the film which I'm very curious about, but I can't manage to find anything said about it. He writes, in almost all of Tarkovsky's films, the hero has some kind of white circle, I believe it means halo, above his head. Have you ever talked to him about it? Or have you had anything to say about it?
But not maybe halo, maybe white hair, maybe like Stalker has this white spot, and also white spot has Gorchakov and Nostalgia. I think he intends that because there's no halo actually. But I don't know, maybe it's just like sign of God, you know, maybe a touch of God, a touch of an angel or something like that, because of course all these men were blessed somehow, and there were, especially these heroes, and as he said, and Stalker especially was a man who gave everything, who renounced to everything but his spiritual quest. So it's kind of a crazy God. You can say it Yurodivy in Russian, yeah. So they have a special mark on them. So maybe that special mark represented by this kind of white spot.
And your father left us with the 7 films, 7 feature films, 7 masterpieces, and of course, a short film. And do you happen to know, or did you happen to find out whether he had some plans for future? I know when he made the sacrifice, it was very ill, but do you know about other projects that he actually had in mind and sadly he could not?
Well, unfortunately, his life was very complicated, as you can imagine. In the Soviet Union, making this 5 films took him 20 years. Although he was very active man, he was burning inside. So he could do a movie a year, you know, as an artist. So this spirit of without working were quite stressing for him, but he was always writing and making a lot of plans for other films, for other movies. Of course, through all his life, as also in my film, as Dostoevsky was his also the you know, fixed idea, you know, the fix of making the film about Dostoevsky on one of his novels, and that was actually something that he wanted to do actually after Sacrifice. Then there were a few projects last year, 1986, he concentrated on 3 or 4. That was Hamlet, the film, not the theater play. Actually, that's why I included the theater play in the film, because it was the beginning, and then, however, he never left the idea of Hamlet afterwards. So he was really working on that. Then the life of Sant'Antonius, and that was very, very, very also important. And of course, I love the Passions. And that was the last few notes he wrote in his diaries, and in the summer of 1986, he was working on this, especially on the figure of Judah and about the betrayal. So it was about that. So there were a lot of projects, but these were the most important, what we want to do right away after the Sacrifice.
And again, if someone on the audience have any questions, any more questions, so this is the time. Maybe I'll try to ask you, do you have one of his films that you relate? I won't ask your favorite films, but the films that emotionally or intellectually or, you know, in any other way you relate the most.
Well, yes, you know, I like every of his films. It depends also on my condition at that period, that personally time of my life, but maybe I prefer one or another. Although I love Stalker, because Stalker is a film that I had an occasion to be on the set. Actually, it was the first film set I ever visited. Well, I was on the mirror, but I was 3, 4 years old, so it was kind of a very remote, childish memories, flashes. But Stalker, I was already 9, 10 years old, and I spent a lot of time on the set, not in Tallinn, because all the externals were shot in Tallinn, in Estonia, but all the internals in Mosfilm Studios, which were next to our house. So I had this occasion, and he was working home also, and being in this, artistic lab, incredible experience of seeing how the Stalker was, changed my life, because I never seen set like that afterwards, because it was incredible how people work, how he gave everything they had, There was no timing, they were working like a few times 24 hours without stopping, and until the shot was done, until the scene was shot, nobody left the studios. So it was a very interesting experience, and that's why Stalker somehow it's a very personal thing, because I could see it in creation. Although, and now maybe this year, this period and the late period, Stalker is very actual as well.
And we talked a lot about your father. I would like to end our discussion a few more minutes. We're talking about you. You are the director of the Andrey Tarkovsky International Film Institute. And first of all, if you could tell me a little bit about the activities you have in this institute, but more than that, do you have, especially with your connections around the world, do you think that Andrey Tarkovsky in what way do you think Andrey Tarkovsky is still there? I mean, I teach at Tel Aviv University, there are courses on Tarkovsky. 34 years after his death, how do you think Andrey Tarkovsky is still perceived in the world?
Yes, actually, our activity is mostly the publication of his archives. We have a lot of things to do still, and exhibitions and retrospectives. Also some projects which are related to his work, dedicated to his work, but they all, I like very much a lot of also participate artistically in this thing. So this always should be something creative for me to do. I cannot be a simple archivist, so it's not that what I am doing. Although in all these areas, it's incredible how he's still popular, but because he's still actual. But all the great artists are actual and not getting old. His films are still, you can watch them as, because many students, for example, many young people, 20 years old, 18 years old, comes and this, I've seen Stalker. It's incredible, it's modern, how they managed to do that. So, and I see that there is a lot of interest, and it will be always, because, his films are talking about our condition, which maybe didn't change for the last 2000 years. It's not about technology, or it's about the profoundness and the spiritual search of a man, and it always be necessary. So that's why actually his films are so different from all the others. It's difficult for me to find it, because sometimes people asking about other directors who maybe could be his followers, or well, not more followers, like students or whatever, but they are known because Tarkovsky is Tarkovsky, because he's so personal. It's impossible to imitate Tarkovsky. It would be a catastrophe, and because it's his own creation. So he's still very daring, and people are still very overwhelmed by his films. And the same thing which I noticed, that this impression about his film, about his art, are the same in Russia, in Italy, I don't know, in Brazil. And it says that maybe at least at the end, human being is human being. We're not that different. Of course, he's a Russian, comes from Russian tradition and Russian art, but he's universal, like all the great artists are.
Okay, so I think that concludes my questions, and I see that answer any more questions from our listeners. So first of all, Mr. Tarkovsky, I would like to thank you very much for being with us. And I'm very sorry that we could not meet with you personally, but hopefully this will happen. In the future. And again, I want to thank you very much for the film. As an admirer of Tarkovsky, I found the film very moving. You know, you call it a cinema prayer, and once you see the film, you understand that you are a true believer in the religion of cinema. And I think that to add to what you have just said, I think there are not too many directors nowadays that actually refer or relate to the cinema as, you know, as in the way that your father related to cinema. It's just making the work of God with a capital G. So again, I thank you. There is one more question, so maybe we'll relate it. Do you recognize your own childhood in the childhood images in Tarkovsky's film? I imagine maybe the maybe mirror is.
Yes, of course, I do, but I think everyone does. As in letters, who wrote Sculpting in Time, you start with the letters from public, and the Russian lady, a lot of people writing, how did you know about the scene when it was raining, and it was the same thing for me. So it's actually this incredible intuition and truthfulness of the image itself, and universality of the image, now, as he says. Yes, of course, I do recognize, and I do recognize in every his film, not only in the childhood memories, and it's something that, you know, his films, you cannot like or dislike them. You actually have to accept them or do not accept. It's not a question, because if you try to understand them with your mind intellectually as a first approach, you fail, and there will be no connection. And actually, he always said that to watch my film, you should be like a child, be a child, because child has a direct emotional contact. And without no borders, you know, over structures we have, intellectual, cultural, and so on. So watching art, the true art, you have to be a little bit a child. So that's actually what happened with his films.
Okay, so with this wonderful, wonderful statement, again, I would like to thank you very, very much for being here. And to thank you very much for the film. I'm sure the audience joins me with this with these greetings. And for all of you in Dokaviv, I hope you will enjoy the rest of the online festival, and hope to see you in future films as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to Dokaviv. It was a pleasure. Thank you.